As the Lutz family's ordeal at 112 Ocean Avenue spiraled into an abyss of inexplicable horror. Their search for answers led them to a chilling discovery that would forever alter their understanding of their haunted domicile. The house, with its picturesque facade and dark, eye-like windows, hid secrets in its very foundations. Secrets that reached back into a sinister past, entwining the Lutz family in a legacy of terror. The disturbances escalated in intensity and frequency, driving George to the brink of obsession. He scoured local libraries, sifted through historical records, and engaged with anyone who held a fragment of the house's history. His quest led him to a retired police officer, a man whose eyes held the weight of things unseen, things best left unspoken. From him, George learned of the house's original owner, a man with a penchant for the occult, who was rumored to have conducted bizarre rituals within its walls. The rituals were said to summon dark entities, inviting them into the physical realm, tethering them to the house. Armed with this knowledge, George's research took on a frenzied pace. He discovered old maps of Amityville, which revealed that the house was built on a site that the local indigenous tribes had long avoided, a place they deemed cursed. The deeper George dug, the more he was convinced that the land itself was poisoned with malevolence. A malevolence that had seeped into the very bricks and mortar of 112 Ocean Avenue. Meanwhile, the physical manifestations within the house grew more violent. Objects moved of their own accord, hurling themselves across rooms with ferocious intensity. Kathy witnessed a chair sliding across the floor, its movement deliberate, as if pushed by unseen hands. The children were terror-stricken, reporting voices that whispered their names. Shadows that stalked them in the hallways, and the feeling of being watched by malevolent eyes. The tipping point came one rain-slick evening when George, in a state of near madness, decided to confront the heart of the house's darkness. Armed with a crucifix and a vial of holy water, he descended into the basement. The sight of inexplicable cold spots and an oppressive sense of dread. There, behind a false wall, he discovered a small, hidden room. The air was thick, the darkness palpable, as if the room devoured light itself. George felt a chill that seemed to claw at his very soul as he stepped inside. The room was bare except for strange symbols etched into the walls. Symbols that resonated with an ancient, malevolent energy. In the center of the room, a stain discolored the concrete floor. A stain that George's frenzied mind interpreted as an echo of the rituals that had summoned the darkness into their home. With trembling hands, George began to pray, sprinkling holy water in the corners of the room. Each droplet hissing as it evaporated into the charged air. As he recited the Lord's Prayer, the house reacted violently. The ground beneath him shook, and a howl filled the air, a sound not of this earth, a sound of rage and torment. Terrified but resolute, George continued his prayers until the tumult subsided, leaving behind an oppressive silence. He emerged from the basement shaken, his faith and his resolve tested to their limits. The discovery of the hidden room and the symbols within offered a grim explanation for the haunting, tying the Lutz family's experiences to rituals that had breached the veil between worlds. The Lutzes were now faced with a choice: to flee and abandon their home to the darkness that claimed it, or to stand and fight for their home, their sanity, and their souls. The discovery had changed everything, casting a new light on the terror they faced. A terror born from the sins of the past, reaching out to claim the living. In the aftermath of the chilling discovery in the basement, the Lutz family found themselves in the grip of an ever-tightening noose of supernatural terror. The entity that had been awakened within the confines of 112 Ocean Avenue now seemed emboldened. its presence permeating every corner of the house, its influence seeping into the very fabric of their lives. The days blurred together, each marked by a crescendo of paranormal activity that left the family reeling. George's obsession with the house deepened, his once warm demeanor replaced by a cold detachment. He spent hours in the hidden room he had uncovered, attempting to decipher the symbols etched into its walls. Convinced they held the key to ending their nightmare. Kathy, meanwhile, was haunted by vivid, terrifying visions that left her questioning her sanity. She saw glimpses of the house's sordid past, images of rituals steeped in darkness, and faces twisted in agony. These visions were accompanied by a pervasive sense of despair that clung to her, draining her energy and leaving her feeling isolated in her terror. The children were not spared from the malevolence that had taken root in their home. They spoke of being tormented by unseen forces, of toys moving on their own, and of nightmarish figures that visited them in the dark, whispering threats with voices like the crackling of fire. Missy, the youngest, became increasingly withdrawn, her conversations with her imaginary friend Jody turning sinister, with Jody demanding loyalty and obedience. The influence of the entity was not confined to the house. George began experiencing inexplicable maladies, bruises that appeared without cause, sudden illnesses that left him weakened. Kathy found herself plagued by an unshakable chill, as if the cold spots in the house were following her, marking her as a target for the entity's wrath. Attempts to seek help from the outside world were met with skepticism and disbelief. The clergy they reached out to for help were hesitant to get involved, wary of the darkness that had enveloped the Lutz family. Friends began to distance themselves, uneasy with the tales of horror that unfolded within the walls of 112 Ocean Avenue. In a desperate bid for answers, the Lutzes invited a team of paranormal investigators into their home. Armed with equipment to measure the unseen forces at play, the team set out to document the paranormal activity. What they encountered surpassed their wildest theories. Their equipment malfunctioned, recordings were erased by unseen hands, and physical attacks left them terrified and bewildered. The investigation culminated in a seance that went horribly awry. A violent manifestation of the entity's power that left no doubt as to the malevolence they faced. The influence of the entity reached its zenith one harrowing night when the family was awakened by what sounded like a marching band stomping through their living room. Furniture moved of its own accord, windows shattered, and the house seemed to groan under the weight of an unseen force. It was a display of power designed to terrify, to assert dominance, and it succeeded. The Lutz family, once hopeful and filled with dreams of their future in the house, found themselves prisoners of a nightmare from which there seemed no escape. The realization that they were facing not just a haunted house, but a malevolent force bent on their destruction, was sobering. As they stood together in the early dawn light, surveying the damage wrought by the night's terror, they knew they had to make a choice. To stay would mean a continued descent into darkness, a risk to their sanity, and perhaps their lives. The influence of the entity had woven itself into the fabric of their existence. A dark thread that threatened to unravel the very essence of who they were. The decision to leave was heart-wrenching. To abandon their home was to admit defeat, to acknowledge that there are forces in this world that defy understanding, that cannot be fought by willpower alone. Yet, in leaving, they hoped to find salvation, to escape the influence that had sought to claim them. 112 Ocean Avenue stood silent as they departed, its windows light dark, watchful eyes. The Lutz family did not look back as they drove away, leaving behind a chapter of their lives they hoped to forget but knew would haunt them forever. The influence of the Amityville house was indelible, a mark upon their souls. A reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows of our world, waiting to be awakened.